This is Lynn Fraser with the Radical Recovery Summit. I'm really happy today to be interviewing Dr. Amy Johnson. Her book, The Little Book of Big Change, talks about how we can change habits by noticing the thoughts that generate the feelings that generate the behaviors. Her approach is a no willpower approach, and her new book, Just a Thought, goes much more deeply into the case of mistaken identity that we have with our thoughts. I hope you enjoy listening to Amy. Welcome to the Radical Recovery Summit, Dr. Amy Johnson. And I would just love to start with, how did you get to where you are now? You have the Little Book of Big Change. You have this no willpower way of working with habits. Can you tell us a little bit about your story and how you developed this approach? And we'll start there.
Yeah, well, I discovered it more than I developed it when I needed it myself. So I had struggled with anxiety for a lot of my life, starting in childhood. It really kind of hit a peak when I was in my early 20s, when I was in graduate school. And then the anxiety got better, panic attacks stopped, it all got better, but then I developed an eating disorder. And to my thinking at that time, these were very separate things. And I was studying
Wow.
psychology in graduate school, and I had everyone telling me, yeah, different diagnoses, different things, right?
Mhm.
And now I see it as the same thing. It just took a different shape, and it just took a different form. Um, but so that's kind of where I was. I had done everything I could to stop panic attacks and anxiety, and somehow those did change and morph, but they didn't go away. And they just took a different costume, put a different costume on. So now I had to try everything I could to end all my food issues.
Right.
And when I say try everything I could, it was a lot of work. It was a lot of trying to change my thoughts, trying to get the food right. So that would hopefully change things, trying to avoid, my world got very small as I tried to avoid triggers and all of this stuff. And none of it felt deep enough even at the time, but I didn't know any better. It was the deepest I
Right.
could see to go. So finally I came across a much deeper way of seeing things, which is kind of what I share now. When someone said, "Hey, what if you are 100% healthy, mentally healthy, well, habit free, you just think you aren't. You just have a lot of thinking that you identify with." And
Right.
when that thinking is there, the thinking tells you you're not okay, I don't feel well, all the stuff. And when
Mhm.
we identify with that, of course, that's what we experience. But it really pointed me to a much deeper place than my moment to moment thoughts and feelings. And everything kind of changed from there.
Mm. That's a really interesting place to be, where we have some sense maybe that we're not just the thoughts and just the experiences we have. And so how do you point people to that? So somebody's really caught up in compulsive thinking about addiction, whether it's alcohol or drugs or food or shopping, it doesn't really matter. It's a similar process. And it feels so personal. It feels like I'm the one having this
Yeah.
craving. I'm the one that has to escape emotionally. So how do you work with opening that up for people?
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. I mean, just
Mm,
suggesting that, and you're right. We're up against a lifetime of conditioning and a whole world, Western society anyway, that
mhm,
agrees. Yeah, that's what you are, right? What you are, what you think and feel. Even if they don't say that, that's for sure the world that we live within, as if that's true. But for someone to really, especially when we're struggling, we're so ready to hear something new,
mhm,
to really consider, like, just what if there's nothing wrong, but this flow of thought and feeling, what I call this flow of psychology, we've just
mhm,
become so identified with it. And there's a lot of little ways to start to poke holes in that. So for example, everyone I've ever met, no matter how addicted or depressed or anxious or anything they are, they experience moments, maybe very fleeting and very few and far between, but they experience moments where they just feel like themselves. When
mhm.
all of this isn't there, and those are kind of the words we tend to use, right? Oh, I feel like myself again, which
Right.
is very telling, which is very telling. And
Mhm.
so I experienced those too, but I thought that was a fluke. I thought, nope, I'm my problems. I'm an anxious person. Oh my gosh, I feel really peaceful right now, kind of like when I was a kid. but I'm sure anxiety's coming back. And sure enough, here it came, you know? So to kind of flip that and start to see, no, what if that piece is who we are? And the other stuff is the experience. I think that's a first step, you know, one of many ways into this conversation, but really kind of gets people noticing that there's so much health always there that we just miss when we think we're our psychology.
Mm, mhm. So then we're into deep into the workings of the mind and identification and ego. And so it's interesting, you have this kind of mix of psychology, you're looking at it through a psychology lens, and also a deep spiritual lens if you're looking at I'm not my thoughts. So that's a very
Yeah.
deep kind of non-dual meditative kind of perspective. How did that happen that you have that combination?
Yeah. Well, I definitely leaned more to the psychology end because that was my training and how things looked for a long time. And I think it came about pretty naturally, seeing that there are going to be limits there. You know,
Yeah.
like it was helpful to some degree to to challenge the content of my thoughts and to do some of that more psychological stuff, you know, but it ran out of juice at some point. At some point I was like, well, I can't question every thought that shows up in my head. I don't have time in my day for that. I don't have energy for that. When I'm in the middle of a craving or an urge, there's no way I'm going to have the resources to challenge a thought or anything, you know? So I saw that from myself. And then I saw that in the people I worked with. We need to see, we need to have a bigger sense, I think, that everything that happens is okay even when it
Mhm.
totally doesn't feel okay. That, like you
Right.
mentioned earlier, what we're experiencing is not personal. We are seemingly separate human beings that seem to feel our own experience, but so it will feel personal, but to start to help people back up and see, oh no, it's just experience. It doesn't mean anything about you. It's not yours to manage or change those yeah, that deeper way of seeing things, it just takes us deeper because in the moment, you know, we can only do or see so much.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And it feels so personal. You know, with my own experience and the work that I do with people as well, we talk a lot about the primitive brain, what generates a lot of the thoughts, the trauma history, all of that. And it feels like, you know, one of the things I remember saying to someone a while ago, so how can you tell me that this isn't personal? Because it's happening here in me. It's happening in this location. It's my body feels this craving for sugar. So I have this thought that I need comfort right now. I need respite from boredom or some kind of emotional distress. So how can you say it's not personal? And so there's that really strong link between I'm experiencing it. So what else is in the moment if it's not just the thoughts about addiction or the thoughts about our personal experience? What else is here? How does that kind of open up for people?
Well, I mean, that's the big question. You're right though. It feels so incredibly personal, but it feels incredibly personal, I would say, because we have a lifelong habit, which is just a habit, it's just conditioning. We have a lifelong habit of thinking it's us, of
Hmm.
not feeling into the space that is there that I mean, the words don't do it, but whatever this expansiveness is that is sort of more of our true nature, whatever our real essence is, it's not a tangible thing. So our very smart brains and our sharp intellect as we get older and we start to go here for information, they just want a thing. They just want something to grab onto, be it a
Uh,
thought or a feeling or, you know, and then our brain is all about kind of trying to give us a nice solid me that everything revolves around. So it
mm-hmm.
totally feels personal. And it's so huge to see that that's only a habit. You know, we're just conditioned for it to feel personal. Our mind goes there and owns everything. But as we start to kind of back off and say, okay, well, this is what's arising, but it's not mine. How can it be mine? Like, I can't take it with me. If it's a nice feeling, I know it's going to feel like it's gone in a second. If it's a
Right.
horrible feeling, it's probably going to feel like mine. But either
Yeah.
way, I can't hold on to that, even if I wanted to. Kind of looking at some of those things that, it sort of peels us back a little bit. And then it's like, okay, well, when all this stuff comes and goes, what is left? To your question, like, that's a big question. What
Hmm.
is kind of the backdrop of all of this? And, I don't know any words that really do it, but I think it's a really great thing for people to sort of explore on their own, like get curious what's behind or beyond all this coming and going stuff. What doesn't change?
Hmm. So you have a personal life and you have habits in your personal life and you have, I understand, a couple of children, and you you kind of move through your life like we all do, with experiences that we have and preferences. I really want this, I really don't want this. And then when it relates to addiction, we, like you said earlier, we double down on trying to control things because that seems like that's the way to go. Well, if I wasn't eating all that sugar, then I wouldn't crave it and then I wouldn't. So how does that kind of permeate into your regular life? So you have children, you want the best for them. I have children, a child and grandchildren. I want them to be happy. I want them we have such strong preferences. So how does that work in terms of the addiction, that faculty of the mind that always wants certain things?
I think the more we just come to see that all minds work in the same way, that, like you're saying, like minds love to control things. But I mean, what's a mind? A brain really is just a machine. It's a really amazing machine. Love it. It loves us. Everything it does is for us and our survival. It's never the enemy, and
Mhm.
it's a machine. And that's what this machine does. Is this your brain? You are the center of your brain's universe. All it cares about is you. All my brain cares about is me.
Yeah.
And even in that, it doesn't care about us going out and having a big life and making friends. It's like, no, let's just stay right here. Let's just keep
It's safe.
everything safe and cozy, because then you're going to get to live as long as you can possibly live. And that's kind of all
Mhm.
it's about. So,
Mhm.
without needing to know a ton about the brain, or it doesn't have to be super scientific at all, I think it's really, really helpful for people to just start to have that bit of a sense of like, oh, as
Mhm.
a physical human being, we have brains that are constantly wanting to own and control. They're so linear. They just want to predict the future because that's how our brain tries to keep us alive, is by telling us what's likely to happen so we can stay safe from it. That's how our
Mhm.
ancestors survived and why we're here. Just having that little sense of that, I don't know, I've found, like, in my own life, I mean, it just it gives, like, just such a bigger sense of things. I
Mhm.
mean, the preferences come up, the wanting to control, the all of the right and the wrong, all of that comes up, and I think more and more it looks like, "Oh, that's a brain." And not that it's not doesn't feel real, not that I disagree with it. When my brain says, "You kids cannot be sick, they need to be safe, this has to happen." I say,
Right.
"You're right, brain. I agree with you. We're on the same page." But
Yeah.
I also know it's a machine doing what a machine does. And I think the
Right.
more we go through life, it's like, there's a softness with some of those demands from the brain. And
Mm.
yeah, we get to be fully human and live in all this conditioning that's here for our own good, but maybe
Right.
not be run around by the conditioning in quite the same way.
Mhm. If we circle back to when you were working with anxiety and panic attacks. So, and then also to bring in this piece about our brain is always on our side. So I know that to be true from experience. And when someone has, your brain is catastrophizing, it's thinking about all of these horrible things that could happen, and you're starting to go into a panic attack, it doesn't really feel like that's very functional. So,
Right.
how do you work with kind of opening that up for people so that they realize, in fact, my brain is not trying to hurt me?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of seeing that in the big picture, again, everything our brain does is to help us. And so at some point, this high energy protective thing got a lot of attention from us, a lot of
Mhm.
fear, a lot of negative attention, but brain
Yeah.
doesn't know negative or positive. It's like, oh my gosh, this must be important. So now it's like this big, huge thing. And
Mhm.
and it's hard to see, you're right. It's hard to see, like, why would my brain give me urges for heroin or alcohol or panic attacks? That there's nothing helpful in that. But in
Mhm.
the bigger picture, just the brain being so habitual and consistent and giving us what's again gotten attention in the past,
Mhm.
that's what's super adaptive. That's where it's helpful. It's up to us, or we have the opportunity to understand it clearly. So, I think that's where it falls apart as we misunderstand it, to your point. And of course we do. Of course we do. We say this feels terrible, this cannot be helpful, but we
Mhm.
kind of just need to zoom out a little bit and see, no, it's again,
Mhm.
it's just a machine. It's a machine
Mhm.
doing the best that a smart machine can do. We aren't that machine. And this is where I think that combination of seeing how the psychology works, but also knowing we aren't our psychology is really that sweet spot, because it's like, okay, my machine for 8 years, my machine, every time I would have the littlest twinge of stress, it would tell me to go eat a ton of food for a long time. I
Mhm.
knew that was wrong or wasn't going to be helpful in the big picture. But it wasn't until I started seeing, oh, this is my brain just really trying to help me, and I'm not that. Like, who am I that gets to see this brain thing happening? I'm clearly not
Mhm.
that. So it's that more zoomed out, kind of bigger relationship, I think, that just does so much for people. That's where we don't have to control life. That's where we can feel whatever's showing up and say, okay, this is here. It's going to come and go, but I'm not it.
I'm not it. So when you talk about thoughts are kind of underlie feelings, and feeling thoughts and feelings drive behavior. So if you have a behavior that's very entrenched, so we could use me as an example. So throughout my life, I started eating really dysfunctionally when I was about 12. I had a lot of trauma. It didn't really show up on my body until I was mid 20s, but I was eating that way. And then, I had several years of not eating well, and sometimes it was emotional support or emotional escape. Sometimes though it grew to be just kind of a habit of that's just kind of the way I would eat. And then I had a period of time for many years when I didn't binge eat, I didn't eat poorly, I ate very healthy, and my weight normalized and everything was fine. And then I come back into a high period of stress and trauma, and then my weight starts going up, my eating starts. And so now here I am, I'm 68, I have decades of experience and of that deep groove of that. And so I don't binge eat anymore, and yet my body is still the size it is. And I'm also kind of aware of I don't want to get into restrictive dieting. I don't think that works. And I would like for my body weight to be lower because it would be healthier. So there's a kind of that mess. And I think that a lot of people have that. There's so much complexity and so many years of habits. So it's, I can look at the thoughts and I can see that's not me. I know that my brain is on my side. And yet, still, when stress comes up, it's like, oh, I know what would fix that. Go get some
Yeah.
ice cream, right? So you must see that a lot with different people that you work with. What would you kind of say around that?
I think it's 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 tough to be in that place a little bit where we have the wisdom to see that we aren't it, that we know it's old conditioning, and that sometimes we still feel the effects of it. Like, for sure, the conditioning still runs, and again, that's a
Mhm.
adaptive thing of the body mind, right? Body and brain, like the conditioning still runs, and maybe the physical effects of that conditioning having run for so long kind of remain. And so I don't know how to make a body behave differently or anything like that, but I do think that there's something really beautiful, and again, kind of coming back from all of it and saying, oh, thank you, brain and body, for doing everything you needed to do to keep me alive for this long. And do I wish that you would catch up and get on board and be a little different and look the way I want you to look or work the way I want you to work, of course. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
fun too. It's the most
Yeah.
sweet, like amazing human thing in the world.
Mm,
And we can be happy and in anything that's happening with the conditioning. And sometimes I
mhm,
think that's, I don't know, but it feels like there's a lot to see in that when we don't get what we want, when we do
mhm,
sort of see what's going on, just things just are the way they are. Such
mhm,
a such an opportunity in that to see, okay, the physical is just going to do what the physical does, but
mhm,
thank God I'm not that, and that I can feel anything
yeah,
in whatever's showing up.
mhm. And so now, the piece that we're working with now then is connection with ourselves and compassion and kindness. So instead of being angry with the brain that it does that, to really just have that kind of sweetness around it. It's like, well, look at that. It is trying to help. It has a lot of experience with this, a lot of longevity. And so is that the turnaround that like the piece that's different in this is that you keep coming back to I don't need to use willpower to try to control my mind and body. All I really need to do is be in connection and see with a different lens.
Yes, and I think the way I don't know, the way I might say it or what looks like the key in there is the understanding. And I don't even mean that as like an intellectual understanding, but the coming
Mhm,
to see, like you said, there's a whole body mind system perfect doing whatever it needs to do.
mhm,
And I get to watch that play out. And I'm not gonna have to do what it tells me to do all the time. It's running
right.
its own show just like it thinks it needs to keep me alive. Wonderful. Thank you. And I can see around that and I can let things come and go. I think that bit of understanding, I guess, or perspective on it is what makes way for exactly what you said, the compassion, the patience, the
Mhm,
letting go of needing to control. Kind of
mhm,
comes from what you said. It comes from like seeing, okay, there's no enemy here. There's no problem
right.
here. I'm not
Mhm,
broken. There's no brokenness. No matter what we're doing to ourselves, addiction wise, we are not broken. We're just in a simple misunderstanding. We're resisting life as it's coming up because of course
mhm,
we are. We misunderstand it. But as
mhm,
we kind of come to see it's just life working the way life works needs to work. Yeah, I think there's just a softening around all of that.
mhm. Yeah, you've referred to in your book a case of mistaken identity, which I think is such a good description of this. It's like we're really not, it's not like we're not the thoughts, but we're more than the thoughts in our mind. We're having these experiences. Yeah. So let's get into some of the things that prevent us from really tuning into that or being aware of that. And one of the big one for me that I see so much is shame. So how do you work with shame around the shame of being an alcoholic or having an addiction of some kind or the shame of other people? So you referred to that a little bit earlier of I'm safe and cozy in here. But then of course that's not really a life. We need to have relationships too. How do you work with shame?
It looks like shame, kind of back to the taking things personal or thinking it's personal. I mean, shame is personal. It's personalization to the max, right? It's like,
Right.
this is
Yeah.
wrong with me. This shouldn't be happening to me. So it's not always an easy place to start with a lot of people unless they've been in this sort of spiritual conversation for a little bit. But I think maybe the most direct way is to kind of look at like, well, who is this you that this is all about? And I love to help people see again, a part of our brain, its function is to create an identity. When
Mhm,
people have, like Jill Bolte Taylor, have a stroke in a part of the brain,
mhm.
suddenly there's this incredible oneness. And this
Right.
me character that can do things right or wrong, where everything's black or white, that's gone. And nothing has changed except the way her brain works, you
Right.
know?
Right.
So
Yeah.
truly, truly, it is an illusion in a sense. I mean, it's a function of a brain that we think we're this separate me and everything's supposed to go the way we think it is.
Mhm.
And so I
Mhm.
think that's just a really great place to start to look. And in the feelings of shame and all of that, I mean, to any feeling, I think there's a lot of emotional work in this because it can be heard or misunderstood, I suppose, as like when we're seeing how all this works, like, oh, well, then I shouldn't be feeling this shame, or that the
Oh,
shame
mhm.
isn't based in truth or whatever, and although that may be true, that doesn't negate that you're feeling a lot of energy and a lot of uncomfortable thinking. So
Yeah.
it's like
Mhm.
leaning into the feelings, like being with the feelings, and at the same time seeing what's really behind them, what they really are, that they're this sort of perceptual illusion in a sense.
Mhm.
Gets to be really powerful, I think.
Mhm. So the work that you do, like in the School of Big Change and the work that you do with people, it happens over a period of time. Could you give people a sense of what they might find if they were to work with you over a period of time in one of your group settings? What would that be like for them?
I have people in the school on purpose who are struggling with all kinds of things because, like you said early on, there it's all the same thing. It's
Right.
all a misidentification. It's all that mistaken identity, and
Mhm.
that as our beliefs and thoughts about who we are and what should and shouldn't be happening, as all of that loosens, it's almost like penicillin. Like it just goes where it needs to go. You don't need to direct it somewhere, right? So
Right, right.
all the
Yeah.
time, people come in with a drinking habit and they might still be drinking, but their relationship is like a million times better. Or, they stop biting their nails along the way because it's like our mind relaxes, our nature restores, our health restores. Our
Yeah.
health has never gone anywhere. So we start with a bunch of people from all over the world with all kinds of issues and really kind of do that peeling back process. Like, what if you're totally healthy? You have never not been, and you have this flow of psychology that you've identified with.
Mhm.
What if, we don't need to listen to everything our mind says as truth in order to make it through life? Because that's what we tend to think. We need to consult our mind. It's our navigator through life. Well, I
Right.
don't think it is. We have the same instincts and wisdom that the birds that know how to fly south have, like we're lived by life. But we weren't taught that. No one was taught that really. So we
Mhm.
think we have to listen to our head to navigate life. So it's kind of a series of like just peeling back beliefs or questioning beliefs. I never feed anyone any belief, but we look at what each of us believes and kind of just be willing to be wrong about that and see things start to open up in that way. That feels like kind of a vague answer, but I don't know if that if that's helpful or not.
No, it is helpful. So what are some of the other questions that you might have people ask or inquire into?
Yeah, in these conversations, I mean it a lot of what you asked, so a lot of questions, of people saying, "What do you mean this isn't personal?" Like
Mhm.
when I feel super worried, I'm up all night worrying. I'm worrying about my kids and my job and my finances or my health. Like, how is that not personal? So that's a huge one. And again, to acknowledge, of course, it feels 100% personal, but kind of where we're looking is not at the content. Everybody's mind
Mm.
content is all about us, right? Of
Right,
course,
right.
this feeling of fear or terror comes up and it attaches itself to your finances and your kids, not
Right.
mine, and everything else. But we're looking at what's beneath that. Like, wow, there's this habitual kind of feeling of fear that arises. And then a mind that wants to tell a story about it, because that's the function of a mind to tell a story about things. So we start kind of digging in. So that's a big one is what do you mean this isn't personal? A lot of stuff that comes up around thinking again, sort of the life, what I call life is living you track, which is
Mhm.
like, but don't I need to change this? And don't I need to do that? And how we just are so conditioned to be very hyper vigilant and
Mhm.
that truly the less we do, the better things go. And that's a
Mhm.
hard thing, especially when you're anxious or suffering. To do less is like so counterintuitive, and difficult.
Mhm.
But as we see, everything's working fine. We just think it's not. And when we think it's not, we step in to try to fix it, to fix our problem, and
Mhm.
then we innocently make things worse. So
Mhm.
Yeah, so those are some of the things. There's so many questions, and it's beautiful how it works because, working with people with any kind of addiction, it's like just in this conversation, their
Mhm.
own wisdom is gonna bring up the questions they
Right.
need.
Very organic. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the inner critic might come in and say, "Well, what do you mean it's working perfectly?" Clearly, it's not. I'm homeless. I'm on the street with alcohol or drug addiction. How can that be working? That's not working. That's not my life working. So most people aren't at that extreme. Most people that you work with would have a home, an internet connection, and the ability to kind of do this work. But we can still
Mhm.
have that kind of feeling of it's not the way that it feels safe or comfortable to me. So so do you work with people in the body? Do you work with the kind of feelings in the body? How does that work for you?
Yeah, I do. But again, usually paired with that, like, let's see what this really is. So those
Okay.
feelings of terror that come up or whatever it might be, shame, all of those big emotions,
Mhm.
like there's so much about seeing that it's really our resistance to emotion that hurts us.
Mhm.
Like as we lean into emotion, they aren't what our mind tells us they are ever. So we get through a feeling and we get to sit and be with energy, just energy, and then a lot of stories. We sit with that energy and then we kind of look at the stories that are being told and just see, wow, that's just the function of a brain.
Mhm.
It detects something and then it wants to tell a coherent story to make sense of things. But the stories, as coherent as they are on the surface, it doesn't make them accurate, you know?
Yeah,
And there's
that's
so
true.
many I love, I studied social psychology a lot, so I love, like, some of the research that's done on this about how, a brain will just make up something that makes sense, but is totally inaccurate just for the
Right.
sake of spitting out a coherent story, you know? Like, it just wants that sense of certainty so much, but it isn't the truth, and I think,
Right.
again, unless you've studied that, how would you know that? Of course, we all believe, think that what our brain says is the truth.
Yeah, we're highly conditioned to believe the brain. Yeah, and the stories. Yeah. And part of that seems to be around safety and comfort, that we're always trying to feel safe. We're always trying to feel like we're going to be okay. And that's part of the drive for substances or processes, behaviors that make us feel okay. That's part of what's going on there. So when someone has something like that, where you have this deep groove of, I've always made myself feel better by going shopping, or I've always made myself better by doing these things. And then we get caught in that, just that groove. So part of what I think I hear you saying is we need to slow down and really pay attention what it is that's going on with our experience. So is that something, how would you encourage, or how would you, if people are just kind of really caught up in that, how do we make that shift from being caught up to being more aware?
Yeah, I think, as we as we start to open to the idea that shopping or the substance or whatever isn't actually doing for us what our mind tells us it's doing for us,
Mhm.
then there is like you're right, like this opportunity to, like, well, let's slow down and let's experiment with this. Let's feel
Mhm.
it. Let's give you an experience of this.
Mhm.
So it's tricky in some ways because in some ways the substance is helping us feel better because of just the conditioning, right? So you feel all keyed up and unwell. You
Yeah.
go, we'll just use that example, you go buy something, suddenly
Mhm.
your mind settles down. Or in the case of drugs and alcohol and food, for me, I didn't even have to eat the food. I was just decide, okay, I'm going to go to the store and I'm going to get all my binge foods and
Yeah.
lay them all out and do my ritual. And I already felt better and I didn't put a thing in my body yet. So
Yeah.
it, like, kind of shows you, okay, this is what's happening. And
Yeah.
again, that's the sort of thing, that the average person, like, we're in a really unsettled state. So how would we know to even look there? So
Yes.
as we kind of
Yeah.
help, yeah, like reverse that a little bit and see, no, look at what's actually happening. Like, check in with yourself and feel when you actually do feel better. And let's see if there's another explanation for that. That's
Yeah.
where I think there gets to be that room. Yeah. To
Mhm.
Like, oh,
Mhm,
I feel that feeling. I'm going to go buy the food or go buy whatever.
mhm,
And then it's like, oh, maybe I'll just settle down on my own.
mhm.
Maybe that little safety thing isn't even part of the equation, and my mind just thinks it is.
Right, right, exactly. So do you recommend people do breathing, relaxation, meditation, anything like that? Or is that part of what you do?
I mean, it is. I don't have a whole host of specific things I recommend, but I think people tend to find what works for them. And for sure, I mean,
Yeah.
you
Mhm.
know, people have their preferences, and stuff's very helpful.
So people could go to your school, and you also have a new book out, just a thought. Can you talk a little bit about what's in the book and what people might find in there?
Yeah. So the book, just a thought. My last book, The Little Book of Big Change, is sort of what we've been talking about as it pertains mostly to habits and addictions. Just the thought is a little broader, so it isn't just around the habits, but it's a lot of what we discussed in this conversation of like seeing how our mind is just doing everything it does because it loves us. It's
Mhm.
just a brain wanting to give us a sense of certainty
Yeah.
because that allows it to feel like it's going to keep us safe, physically alive, and that
Mhm,
we just innocently misunderstand that. So
mhm,
it talks about things that are universal that all minds do, like
mhm,
worry. And the evolutionary reasons even why a mind worries. It's thinking ahead to what might happen. But
mhm.
today we miss that. We just are in the worry and we're in the story and we're like, "Oh yeah, this bad stuff could happen." And we
Yeah.
we miss the fact that it's just a machine, doing an
Mhm,
evolutionary process
mhm,
or comparing or problem solving, all these things that are so universal that on some way I think we know they're universal, but they also feel so personal when we're in them. So
mhm.
I hope this book kind of helps people to see, wow, all of this is a universal process. It's not
Right.
really about me. And that makes for a lot of distance from our experience, I think.
I think normalizing the function of the brain is very helpful. And also, it takes away some of the shame, like, "I'm doing something wrong, there's something wrong with my brain that it works
Yeah.
this way." And in fact, it's
Yeah.
not just our brain, it's everybody's.
Yes. Yeah,
Mhm,
that's huge. Huge to see. Because if it looks like our brain, of course we're going to listen and get involved and try to counteract it. But when
mhm,
we see that it's a universal process of a brain, then it's a lot easier.
mhm, mhm. So do you believe that everybody can get better? Kind of get out of the grip of habits and compulsions?
Without question. I mean, everyone is better. We just don't know it.
Right.
We're better already. We're healthy already. We just don't know it because of all that conditioning. And I for sure know for sure that everyone can wake up to that.
Mm, mhm. I know that to be true as well, and, I think it's always good to state that because it doesn't always feel like it could be true. It feels like so if there's somebody maybe just for kind of as we're winding down towards the end of our talk here, so somebody has very common in our culture that aggression that I need to fix things, I need to use my willpower. I kind of think maybe she's right when she says I'm already healed, but it's not my experience. So how would you talk about that? People don't need to be pushy with themselves, they're aggressive with themselves. And yet so many people really I mean, that's our culture. Our culture says, yeah, you have to really work hard at this. So what would be some kind of final words for people?
A couple things. I mean, I love to look at kids in as a model of how we're designed. We
Mhm,
don't lose that. We lose touch with it, but we don't lose it. So look at a 1-year-old. I mean, a 1-year-old will throw a bloody tantrum wherever they are. They don't care who's looking. They don't care how embarrassing it is. They don't
yeah,
care how much snot is coming out of their nose as they cry. Like they're just fully in their emotions, and then they get up and they brush themselves off and then they want to go play.
right.
And there's something so beautiful in that. We could if that were us, we'd say, look at my anger problem. Look at my issues. Look at how I
Mhm,
carry on. It would be all about me, me, me. And it just
mhm,
isn't yet. Just for brain reasons and conditioning
mhm,
reasons. It
mhm,
just isn't yet for a 1-year-old. That is possible. And that's still there in all of us. It's just that we're
mhm,
up against this thought that looks true,
mhm,
So I think looking at kids, remembering when we were kids, or even remembering today when there was a little moment last night when you were falling asleep, when all the thoughts about everything that's wrong kind of just fell away. What'd you
Mhm.
feel? You felt peace. Most people feel peace as our thinking settles down, not the other way around.
Right.
So it starts to show us that was huge for me again because I thought I was this anxious, horrible person. And it's
Right.
like, oh no, that's only in thought. Because as my mind settles down, somehow I feel safe, safer, kind of like myself more. Everything's okay. It's
Mhm.
only when thought revs up that I see all these problems. So
Mhm.
that's something so simple that I think anyone can see. And yes, you might feel so far from that. And I understand that. I mean, I think everyone who's struggling feels very far, but we're
Mhm.
never as far as we think we are. And that's really
Right.
literal. We're never
Literally.
as far from that health as we think we are.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's wonderful. Yeah, and very encouraging. And I think one of the things that we kind of need on this journey is some optimism that it's possible and that it's not just for really special people who are going to heal themselves. It's really for everybody. If you wanted to just name the two books and your website, and so how could people get a hold of you?
Yeah. So my website is dramyjohnson.com, which is dramyjohnson.com. And you can find links to everything there. I have a podcast. My recent book is Just a Thought. And the other one's called The Little Book of Big Change. And yeah, all kinds of free resources and other stuff there too.
I noticed there's a lot of free resources. That's very helpful. Your free webinars on there, and there's a lot of free resources that are really great. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for being on the summit and for sharing your wisdom and all the work that you do every day, but also here with us. I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
This is Lynn Fraser with the Radical Recovery Summit. We have an exciting lineup for our fifth annual, including Dr. Gabor Maté as our keynote speaker. Head on over to radicalrecoverysummit.com to learn more and watch the interviews.